MS Now's Inez de la Cuetara is reporting from Davos. MS Now's Vaughn Hilliard is at the White House, and Richard Stengel, former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and an MS Now political analyst, is here in studio. So, Vaughn, there's a lot to talk about, but headlines, what did we hear from the president, especially when it comes to the NATO alliance?
Right, Chris, number one, I think it's notable that when the headline coming out of his remarks is the fact that the president of the United States did not explicitly call for armed war against a NATO partner, I think that that is notable in itself. The president suggesting that he doesn't intend to use force, says that it is not on the table in order to annex Greenland, even though in just the last 20 minutes, he went to say that the military, he doesn't think at this point in time, is necessary. That is an extension, though, of the extent to which he believes that economic coercion, and particularly through the use of unilateral tariffs, can all but force the hand of European countries to do his bidding and seize to his demands. I want to let you listen to the president suggest that he and the United States are imperative to NATO's future, and yet questions what NATO is providing to the U.S. in return. Take a listen.
The United States is treated very unfairly by NATO. I want to tell you that. And when you think about it, nobody can dispute it. We give so much and we get so little in return. The problem with NATO is that we'll be there for them 100%. But I'm not sure that they'd be there for us.
Of course, NATO's Article 5, the Defense Protection Clause, has been invoked only one time in history, and that was in the aftermath of the September 11, 2001 attack, when coalition forces, allies of the United States, joined to defend America and its people. This is a moment here where the President of the United States, standing there in Switzerland, openly questioned how these European countries could sustain, though, without having the United States as trading partners. There is a lot of deep skepticism coming out of his speech, only pushing that skepticism even at a more accelerated pace coming out of course, the hesitancies in which Macron and Carney specifically suggested on the global stage that Europe should go forward, understanding that there is a new world order and the United States may not be at the center of it for them.
So, Rick, President Trump offered what I think is fairly new reasoning for why he needs Greenland. He's talked about it as national security, but now he was arguing today that we're owed it because of what the U.S. did for Greenland during World War II. Take a listen.
We saved Greenland and successfully prevented our enemies from gaining a foothold in our hemisphere. So we did it for ourselves also. And then after the war, which we won it big. Without us, right now you'd all be speaking German and a little Japanese, perhaps. After the war, we gave Greenland back to Denmark. How stupid were we to do that?
Is there logic in that?
You know, Chris, we're looking at the consequences of a president of the United States who's never read a book before. He's wrong about us possessing Greenland. Norway was conquered by the Nazis. Greenland went into a kind of a preserve, a protectorate. Harry Truman tried to buy Greenland after World War II in 1946, which shows that it was independent and not part of us. So he has his history wrong. But speaking of history, and I don't want to over-exaggerate this, but what we've seen today is something that is really new in the 21st century, which is, as Mark Carney called it, a rupture between the United States and Europe. This Atlantic Alliance, and alliances is something Trump doesn't understand or believe in, but the Atlantic Alliance has kept the peace in the world for 80 years. It has boosted prosperity for everybody involved. And I think one of the things that the Europeans are realizing is just how much leverage they actually have over the United States. The European Union is our largest trade partner. The European Union owns 10% of U.S. treasuries, owns 10% of U.S. debt. The The European Union has tremendous leverage over the United States. And I think
he makes it sound like they don't. We have all the leverage.
Well, I think he's wrong. And I think if the Europeans decide, as Mark Carney said, that we can unite together in opposition to a hegemon, to an authoritarian hegemon who's trying to cripple us with tariffs, we can do that. I think they can do that. And I think we're seeing for the first time today the Europeans realizing, man, we need to really group together here. The U.S. is not our friend. He's setting himself up as an adversary. He's insulting us. We have to use our leverage.
So, Inez, how are world leaders reacting to what we heard from Trump, particularly on the Greenland threats today?
Yeah, Chris, so we did just get reaction from the Danish foreign minister who spoke to reporters and said that given the president's speech, it was clear that the president's ambitions to take Greenland remain intact. He did say it was positive that President Trump doesn't want to use military force to take Greenland. Overall, here in Davos, we have been seeing the Europeans presenting a more united front. They've been more forceful, I think, than they have been in trying to push back on the president's comments. I'll let you listen to other European officials that we heard from earlier today.
And when it comes to the Arctic, I think President Trump is right. Other leaders in NATO are right. We need to defend the Arctic. We know that the sea lanes are opening up. We know that China and Russia are increasingly active in the Arctic.
I think that we should solve this problem on diplomatic way.
Okay. And I think what we need as an off-ramp now is some kind of a process whereby we start working on a real problem, which is Arctic security.
So clearly, the Europeans have been trying to show that they can bolster security in the Arctic, but that hasn't been enough for President Trump, who says only the U.S. can safeguard Greenland. Beyond that, the question has really been, despite this forceful rhetoric, will the Europeans actually take action? And we did just get a statement moments ago from a member of the European Parliament, who is also the chair of the Parliament's International Trade Committee, Bernd Lange, writing in a statement that they've suspended work on the EU-U.S. trade deal. He says, given the continued and escalating threats, including tariff threats against Greenland and Denmark and their European allies, we have been left with no alternative but to suspend work on the two Turnberry legislative proposals until the U.S. decides to re-engage on a path of cooperation rather than confrontation and before any further steps are taken. So I think the Europeans clearly wanting to show that they can take action, that they will take action. We did also hear from a European official earlier saying that the Europeans were considering retaliatory tariffs, Chris.
Inez, thank you for that. Well, look, Rick, clearly, in addition to saying, here's what we can do, the European leaders, the NATO leaders, would like to see Donald Trump take an off-ramp. They have lots of ideas for off-ramps. But is there anything you've heard to indicate, besides the fact that he said, that we're not going to use military action, that indicates that he's looking for an off-ramp?
Chris, the thing that you can't account for in international relations is individual emotions and illogical behavior. I mean, Trump's desire for Greenland is to have that big island, which he thinks is bigger than it is because he's been looking at Mercator maps all of his life as opposed to globes, can be part of the U.S. The idea that that there's security needs, and of course there are. We had, after World War II, we had dozens and dozens of bases in Greenland. We have one now. Did Trump increase that during his first term? Did he add any American soldiers or any bases there? No. What he says about their Russian and Chinese boats surrounding Greenland, even his own Defense Department intelligence service say that is not true. His desire for Greenland is a narcissistic, aggressive, Don Road doctrine desire to have the U.S. name on this huge piece of land. He's a real estate mogul. So the idea that he would be placated by a plan, which I think they should offer, of how we increase security in Greenland, how we increase Arctic security, how we use NATO members and have NATO soldiers and NATO equipment there, that would be great. I just don't think it's going to appease him.
And then let's talk about Canada, because Mark Carney had some very pointed things to say, and Trump responded. I want to play both of those for you.
We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watch your Prime Minister yesterday, he wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements.
Well, remember when he told Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office that he wasn't thankful enough. So that's a recurring theme with Donald Trump. But can I just get your reaction to Canada lives because of the United States?
Yes. By the way, Chris, I'm sorry. I'm glad you mentioned Zelensky. Every moment that we're talking about Greenland and not talking about Ukraine, Vladimir Putin is ecstatically happy. That is they should be talking about Ukraine. Ukraine is a much greater violation than anything we're even contemplating in Greenland. Not that I want to make that comparison. But Mark Carney's speech, I think, is probably one of the most important speeches of the 21st century about geopolitics, because he basically was saying, without once mentioning Donald Trump's name or the United States, that we can no longer depend on America to be the backstop of this globalized, rules-based order that has kept the peace for 80 years, and that countries now need to do more independently for themselves, as well as with each other outside of the U.S. framework. That's bad for America. We benefit from alliances. We benefit from our links to Europe. And Trump thinks, I mean, he's only going to be president for a little while longer, but we will suffer the consequences of his violation of this rules-based order for decades to come.